You're listening to the Valley Labor Report with David Story and Jacob Morrison.
I just almost don't know how to talk about this because it's so sad. But there's a story out of North Carolina that is just tragic. There's a 5-year-old boy that was named Cannon Hennant, and he was shot by his neighbor last week. The killer's been arrested and is in jail facing first-degree murder without bond. The more that I read about it, the sadder it is, because apparently the day before the boy was murdered, the murderer had dinner with the family. The father had invited them into their home because he seemed distressed. And so, in part just because of the raw gut level instinct of injustice that folks have when anything bad happens to children, the story has gained national and international attention. A GoFundMe has been set up for the family, presumably to cover, funeral expenses and stuff like that. And it's raised like $300,000, which is much more than the initial goal of $5,000. And that is great. Yep. I mean, yep. God be with them. This is
terrible situation.
It's a terrible situation. I cannot I've got I've got nieces and nephews, or basically I don't have blood nieces or nephews, but they may as well be. I love them, and that are about that age, and I cannot imagine the pain that these folks are feeling. It's just a terrible situation. And so that's part of the reason that it's gained that this big attention, that much attention, because anytime something happens to kids, these innocent, pure creatures, it really riles up a gut sense of injustice. Why is the world like this? But unfortunately, another reason that the story has gained steam is because the killer was black and the boy was white. And so the story is being shared around conservative type pages with statements like, where are his hashtags, where is justice for Cannon, where are his marches, et cetera, putting justice for this little boy in opposition to justice for victims of police violence like George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, etc. I mean, it's just, it's so, it's
political.
It's just so vile. I think the boy's mother has come out against the boy's death being used in this way. And you'll notice, right, this is never the case for victims of police brutality, right? When you have victims like George Floyd, like Breonna Taylor, like Philando Castile, justice for these victims, change in the system to make it so that more victims are not created in the future. This is never placed in opposition to any other victim or any other initiative for justice. When people talk about justice for George Floyd or justice for Breonna Taylor, that's the standalone
Yeah, it's not
thing,
in a vacuum.
right?
Happen.
It's not in opposition to any other justice movement or anything like that. And in fact, Black Lives Matter groups have championed victims of police brutality that are not black. Daniel Shaver was a white man brutally murdered by police in Arizona. Daniel Shaver's murder is honestly more, I found it more disturbing than the murder of George Floyd, which, I don't even know. That feels gross to say because you're comparing both of them. But it's really, if you look up Daniel Shaver, the murder was disgusting. Just disgusting. And I do not believe that cop is in prison. But like with this boy, conservative media outlets used his death as they're using cannons to gin up an us versus them storm. But Black Lives Matter activists and others were sharing these stories in attempts to get justice for this man's family. And this is the difference between these narratives, right? And it's important. Black Lives Matter is a movement out for justice for victims of police brutality and for victims of systemic oppression specifically. These conservative fearmongers take the lives of these innocent folks to gin up division, despite the fact that no one believes in anything other than justice for this boy and his family. Additionally, it's important to point out that to the extent that justice can be given, which of course it never can be fully, everything is being done to make it right. The murderer is in jail without bond. He was immediately caught. The family will not have to pay for any medical bills or anything, but Breonna Taylor's murderers are out free. Accomplices to George Floyd's murder, out on bail. The police union president's still fighting for their jobs, folks. That's why.
Charged on the land, a population burned up, bled dry. The marginalized multiply and unite to fight. You vacant the world, now they're tearing you apart. The soil you held sacred now blackened with.
So like I was saying, I mean, it's really important to point out, you know, like the extent to which justice can be given to the family. I mean, like I said, of course, it never can. You're never going to be able to make that right. But to the extent that it can be, everything is being done to make it right. The murderer's in jail without bond. He was immediately caught. The family is not going to have to pay for any medical bills or the funeral, and it looks like they're going to have a decent amount left over afterwards. And like, man, that is great. I mean, you know, I mean, that is fantastic. Like I said, Breonna Taylor's murderers, they're out free. The accomplices to George Floyd's murder, they're out on bail. Their police union president is still fighting for their jobs. That list, the list of killer cops that are out free, or that I could list that for the rest of the show. They're roaming a license, and sometimes they still have a cop job. They still have a license to kill. And there are entire organizations and systems that are designed specifically to protect them from any accountability. Oftentimes, when a police officer is found to be in abuse of his power, he'll get fired from one precinct and go work in another. I mean, there is no accountability for these folks. I mean, literally, there's a whole legal doctrine of qualified immunity, which means that they don't have to follow the Constitution if they couldn't reasonably be expected to know what the Constitution says. It's absurd. That's why we have to be out in the streets for Breonna Taylor, and it's not necessary to be out in the streets for Hennant, because there was never any point in this episode that justice for this boy, to the extent that it could be given, like I said, there was never any point in this episode where that was in question. But for Breonna Taylor, for George Floyd, for Philando Castile, for Sandra Bland, for Eric Garner, they have not received justice yet.
And probably won't. If you go by past experiences, I mean.
So donate to the family of the boy. Do it. It's a good cause. I mean, God knows nothing is going to fill the hole in their heart. Yeah. But for God's sakes, don't use the death of this boy to put a wedge between you and your neighbor. Don't use his death to fight against justice for Elijah McClain or Eric Garner. They all deserve justice.
Exactly. This is where we're at. It's really
like, it's actually sickening. I mean, it is really, it makes me like physically ill when I see this stuff. It makes me, it's just disgusting. Thanks for tuning in, folks. We appreciate your time. If you want to see what we're up to throughout the week and get our snide quips about the news of the day, then you should follow us on social media. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/Valley Labor Report. We're on Twitter at Labor Reporters. I'm on Twitter at JacobM_AL. David is on Twitter at Radical Unionist. And if you missed part of the show and want to go back and watch it later, you can search YouTube for The Valley Labor Report and subscribe to our channel. You can go back and watch the full show there, and we also clip segments and release it throughout the week. And we also upload the program on more than 11 different podcasting apps, so you can see if we are on your listening platform of choice. You can go to thevalleylaborreport.transistor.fm/subscribe. And of course, if you appreciate our work and want to help us stay on the air, consider throwing us a couple dollars a month on patreon.com/thevalleylaborreport.